Okay, thank you for the presentation of us two. Today we will be talking about the project How to Design a Decentralized Autonomous Organization. We are a team of 3 researchers that conducted this research on how to design a decentralized autonomous organization. And we are all part of the Institute of Organizational Viability at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. This project came about through a problem which was addressed within the practice. So Decentralized, which is our practical research partner, was asked to design a DAO, and this addressed a lot of questions which were present in the space. How to design a DAO, which structural stones to think about, which organizational aspects to actually consider when setting up a DAO structure. So we were asked to go in the team and do research on this subject matter. And lastly, we set up a proposal, a grant proposal, and handed that in to the Swiss Innovation Agency. And since 2022, we've been working on this project on how to design a decentralized autonomous organization. In the beginning, we were trying to figure out which organizational stones, on the analogy of Lego stones, that actually work within an organizational setting on blockchain technology. We compartmentalized these Lego stones, structured them so that we would be able to, in the end, actually form working decentralized autonomous organizations. The goal of this project is to build a design framework that helps practitioners, but also helps researchers to know which organizational structures to consider and to think about when thinking about of the foundation or the funding of a DAO. So how we built our design framework and how we came about this whole project. Initially, like with every other research project, an extensive literature research was part of this whole research project. But in this regard, with this matter, we did it from 2 different perspectives. One from the DAO perspective, so the DAO literature, but also from the organizational theory perspective. So we try to understand traditional organizational structures which maybe needed to be integrated within DAOs as well. This led to our first framework structure, which was discussed in 10 interview settings with domain experts from the practical side, from the legal perspective, and from the organizational theory perspective as well. The second version of our framework, then thereafter, was conducted, and we evaluated that within a focus group setting comprising of 8 DAOists and potential users of these frameworks and potential users of an actual framework that is able to initiate the process of funding a DAO. So where we're at right now within the project, we're actually technically implementing our DAO design framework, and we're setting up a second, I'd say, discussion and paper within the 32nd European Conference on Information Systems in Paphos. This is our DAO design framework, and it contains 3 constitutional elements on the outside of the circle, which is legislation, purpose, and the business case of a DAO. So these aspects need to be considered and need to be carefully thought about before actually going into the 5 structural elements of a DAO. The 5 structural elements are the 5 dimensions in the middle, which Florian will be talking about afterwards extensively, and I will be highlighting the constituent elements on the outskirts. So within the structural elements, you have organizational bodies. I will not go in detail because Florian will afterwards give you some examples on this and give you some more context in what to think about when designing organizational bodies. But it is important to remember, okay, organizational bodies definitely need to be thought of. A decision-making process also needs to be thought of when designing a DAO. So to speak, one needs to think of voting models, one needs to think of a quorum, and how to actually incentivize participation within the decision-making process. What also is really important when designing a DAO is to think about the token and the token structure. So to speak, think about token models and the token quantity of the usage token, but also of the governance token. One also needs to think about treasury, how to set up treasury, which assets are contained within a treasury. Is it physical assets and digital assets on the blockchain technology, or is it just cryptos? And then a crucial part in how to actually enhance decision-making is setting up communication channels and actually enabling access throughout the community. So everyone within the community needs to know where the information is stored, needs to have access to the information, and also needs a transparent communication channel to actually, be able to take part within the processes of the DAO. So, as I said at the beginning, I will talk about the constituent elements of our DAO framework, which is the purpose, what is really important when funding a DAO and when initiating this process is to ally the few funding members of a DAO to one mission, to one purpose, and to actually execute on this vision. And what is also really important in funding a DAO in the process of initiation is to build a broad purpose that is able to reach a broad community. When this purpose in a DAO, and this is different to traditional organizational structures, is reached, a DAO should either find a new purpose quickly or should close itself, which we saw in the Constitution DAO as well. The purpose was not reached, so the members were refunded. What is probably also has been discussed extensively throughout the last few days is the constituent element of legislation. So what is really important in funding a DAO is that the legal entity or the question of legal entity actually gets solved so that there is still freedom and capability of designing the other aspects. And the legal entity has a lot of influence, especially on the organizational body structures. Then we also, in Switzerland, have many legal entities which are interesting to choose from, which is the Swiss Association and the Foundation. The last aspect of the constituent elements is the business and the use case. And this also is a big part of current academic discussion. So currently what is going on is that the thinking of business models within decentralized technology is completely being remodeled and being rethought of, potentially including all DAO stakeholders. Lastly, create open and fair, transparent value creation models. So now I would give the hand to Florian to be able to talk about the structural elements.
Thank you very much, Lukas, and welcome from my side as well. I appreciate that still, even though it's quite early, quite a few people found their way to our talk. So I'm going to speak about these 5 structural elements and give you also some examples. Even though I have to say we developed this framework, but what we didn't do yet, we didn't use it to systematically analyze existing DAOs to see how they are implemented along these different elements. Nevertheless, for this talk, we try to find some examples of DAOs, how they implemented these structural elements, just to make it a bit more tangible for you. Good. Now, the first element are organizational bodies. So this means the organs of the DAO. This can be different teams, different groups in a DAO that you can define. It's also a mental model to think about your DAO. So the community, for example, in our view, is also an organizational body, but there can be others, such as a core team and so on. And also if you have a legal structure that may define some organizational bodies in your organization. It's also the case, as you probably know, that it doesn't always make sense for everyone to be involved in every decision. So somehow having distinct teams with distinct decision rights can make a lot of sense for efficiency reasons. So some examples for this, if you look, for example, at DYDX, they have so-called boroughs, where you have different groups where specialized skill sets are collected and they're working on different areas. Also in Bankless DAO, you have guilds, and also these guilds, they have different responsibilities, doing different tasks, having own decision rights and so on. So giving this structure within a DAO community. The next point is decision making. It's a big topic in DAOs in general, and also a highly debated topic, because there could be different reasons on how you want to, or why you want to set up a decision-making mechanism in a certain way. So there is often the saying, or you could think about what is a fair decision-making mechanism. People might say, yeah, everyone should have one vote, so one person, one vote. On the other hand, you have token-based voting, where I would say the ones with more tokens have more power. What is fairer? It's difficult to tell, because, I mean, if a person invests many resources in a project, you could also argue that the person has the right to have more decision power in an organization. Well, a crucial thing when you design your DAO might be to think about having different decision-making mechanisms for different areas. And it's also important, and this already shows you a bit how these different elements are connected in this framework, that you match your decision mechanism with the purpose of a DAO. Just to tell you, those few statements that we put here on the slides are mainly from our work and discussions also with practitioners and experts. In our forthcoming publication, there are even more of these important hints and points that you can read up then. Just as an example, so classic Maker DAO, they have a token-based quorum voting, more or less the one token, one vote principle, whereas, for example, Gitcoin have this implementation of quadratic voting or quadratic funding in their case, where the voting power is equal to the square root of the number of tokens. So the more power you want to have, you need to have quadratically more tokens. There are other voting mechanisms that you can think of, and there is also a high experimentation in the space of DAOs. Then we have the token. Tokens can be used for many things in DAOs. It can be used to signal membership. It can give, as we talked already, decision rights. They can be financial assets of a DAO. Here also the regulation kicks in again. So the ones that attended our workshop yesterday heard a lot about regulation for DAOs and how you might not want to have an asset token in a DAO, because this can be quite challenging from a regulatory perspective. So there are also many things you need to consider, because tokens can also be seen as some force that guides the activities within DAOs. There are different designs here. You can think about how to design your supply whether it should be tradable or not. So Uniswap, for example, has a one token model, where they also added, I think 1 month ago, some incentives to be more active in the governance process. Whereas the Sandbox, for example, has a multi-token model where you have a native currency to vote. Then you have tokens to create NFTs that you need to be able or to be eligible for creating NFTs and so on. And then we also have the treasury element. This is also an important element of each DAO that can consist of different tokens, can be cryptos, can be NFTs, or even real-world assets. And one major thing about DAOs is that the group, the community, the DAO members can collectively manage a treasury. Here, just also as an example, Arbitrum has quite a big treasury that the token holders can vote on to decide on funding decisions for the development of the organization and its technology. While an example of a DAO that holds physical assets is CityDAO. They own a plot of land in Wyoming that they are collectively also deciding what to do with it. Last but not least, the communication element is an element that is often underestimated and can also be tricky to design because you can have many channels in DAOs where you have discussions. You also need to think whether you want to share all the information with everyone or whether this might be an information overload. So there are also many elements that you could design and tweak. And here, just some general examples. I think these general channels, almost all DAOs have X, Discord, Telegram, and so on. But there are also some specific forums that these DAOs have where they try to somehow guide these discussions in certain ways. Good. With this, I only have two things to tell you if you're interested to dig deeper into DAOs. The first thing is more from an academic perspective. We are organizing the European DAO Workshop, an academic conference that also has some spaces for practitioners. So if you're interested, this will take place on July 4th and 5th in Winterthur. Visit our webpage for more information on this. And if you're more on the practical side and interested in how to build DAOs, get more involved into this discussion, I can recommend you to check out DAO Swiss, which is the industry association for DAOs in Switzerland, to get more involved in that field. With this, I conclude the talk, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Lukas and Florian. Do we have any questions for Lukas or Florian? We have one right here, and then we'll get to you next.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. I think the topic of DAOs is very interesting. Just from a practical standpoint, I mean, most of the DAOs that I see currently, like in the DeFi landscape, they're just one token, one vote. And there's a huge problem with that. You see sometimes they have a treasury, and there's a vote on how this treasury is going to get managed. And there's some proposal coming in. Then there's a flash loan. Someone gets 10 million tokens, votes on the proposal, and basically gets a share of the treasury, or doesn't even need to be a flash loan. I've seen examples where founding members of the DeFi project basically use the treasury's funds to vote on proposals to basically get the tokens, right? So this is a huge problem. I would like to know if you would have some, what you would propose to basically minimize this problem, or if you encountered similar stuff during your research. And the other thing, I mean, in like classical organizations, if a CEO, for example, gives himself a huge payout, which I think is a similar scenario to when, I mean, a DeFi founder basically votes to give himself, I don't know, some amount of tokens, right? I mean, the CEO can do that, basically say, okay, we've hit these milestones, we've hit some numbers, and there's going to be a bonus, right? But I mean, there's also a board committee that looks out for the shareholders, and they can basically fire the CEO if he does something that is not aligned with the shareholders of the company. I'm not really sure if I see something similar in the DeFi landscape, if there's like a board committee that can fire some developer or some, I don't know, some huge whale. Basically, I would just like to know your opinion on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, there are many aspects that you touch on in this question. But so for the first question, there were these attacks, also flash loan attacks in the governance space. So I think currently we're at the stage where more and more DAOs are thinking about more elaborate structures, organizational structures. That also shows, for example, in new toolings. I don't know whether you attended the Aragon talk yesterday. They have now this approach of more modular governance, multi-body governance, which I think is very useful and very interesting. And with this, you might be able to have different decision-making mechanisms in different areas. Also, I think in DAOs, there might be some bodies that are not totally anonymous. So if you think of a board, as you mentioned it, especially if you think about legal structures, then you're even required to have a board, for example, in a Swiss association. Then you have names there, and such attacks with flash loans are become more difficult because maybe you have one person, one vote in this specific body. You could also think of some veto rights for certain decisions where the community or some delegates have a veto right to counteract such attacks. So there is a lot of innovation going on, but it's still quite open and unclear. What we try to do with our framework is to give some hints where DAO designers should think about or look closely, also profiting from decades of research in traditional organizations. So because DAOs don't need to reinvent the wheel for everything.
So we have, we're going to move on. We need to move on to the next speaker. Okay. But if anybody has any more, I know there's a couple more questions. You can find you outside and talk afterwards. So give it up one more time for Lukas and Florian. Thank you.
Thank you.